Does being overweight help or hurt cancer treatment? Imagine sitting in an oncology clinic, observing two patients about to start treatment for advanced cancer. One is lean, what we'd traditionally call a healthy weight. The other is carrying a significant amount of excess body fat. They're both given the exact same modern immunotherapy drug. Who survives longer? Most people, including most doctors, would bet on the lean patient. But according to some deeply puzzling data, they might be entirely wrong. And that counterintuitive reality is why this matters. Because if you or a loved one ever needs critical cancer treatment, there is a very real chance that the standard bathroom scale is lying to your doctor. It's giving them a fundamentally flawed picture of your biology. For decades, fat has been treated like biological luggage, inert, passive, just baggage we carry around. But a wave of clinical data is forcing us to completely dismantle that idea. Fat literally changes how life-saving drugs work inside your body. Multiple clinical studies were showing that overweight or obese patients with advanced cancer were actually surviving longer on certain immunotherapies than leaner patients. Researchers called it the obesity paradox. Here's how it works. When a person carries excess fat, that tissue releases signals that cause chronic low-grade inflammation throughout the entire body, like a quiet fire burning in the background, all the time. Over years, or even decades, your immune system's patrol cells, your T cells, operate in that inflamed environment and become exhausted. They develop physical markers on their surface that say, "I'm burned out." They stop responding vigorously to threats. Tumors exploit that exhaustion. Cancer cells use molecular switches to disguise themselves from the immune system, essentially putting those already exhausted patrol cells to sleep. So the fat tires the immune system out, and then the cancer finishes the job. Modern checkpoint inhibitor immunotherapies work by releasing a brake on the immune system. They block the cancer's disguises and force the suppression to release, so the immune cells can wake up and finally attack the tumor. Think of it like a car with two parking brakes pulled all the way up, one pulled by the cancer, one pulled by years of fat-induced inflammation. When the immunotherapy comes in and releases those brakes, the snapback is immense. The immune system surges forward twice as hard. Researchers saw this in obese mice with tumors. Releasing the immune brake produced a far stronger recovery than in lean mice. And in human data covering hundreds of patients on these drugs, the heavier patients had statistically better survival. But, and this is critical, there is a very dark side to this. Turbocharging an already inflamed immune system carries real risk. You can trigger a catastrophic overreaction. The immune system stops targeting just the cancer and starts attacking healthy tissue, causing severe organ damage. Animal studies showed fatal reactions in obese subjects that simply didn't happen in lean ones. So before you wonder whether gaining weight might help someone's treatment, hold that thought, because the protective effect of being obese might be a complete illusion. A major research team from one of Europe's leading cancer centers in Paris took a hard look at this in 2023. They analyzed hundreds of patients with advanced skin cancer and lung cancer, all treated with immunotherapy. And what they found exposed a massive flaw in how the earlier studies had been done. It all comes down to BMI, body mass index. BMI is just height and weight. It tells you nothing about what that weight is actually made of. Judging a patient's biology from their BMI is like judging how good a book is by measuring the thickness of its spine with a ruler. You have no idea if the pages inside are rich or blank. You're just measuring mass. But it's even worse than that, because BMI is typically measured at a single point, the day the patient walks into the clinic to start treatment. It ignores what happened to their weight in the months before. And in cancer, unintentional weight loss is one of the most powerful red flags in medicine. When a patient loses weight without trying, the tumor is consuming their resources. The body is wasting away. Here's the critical insight. Many of the lean patients in the early obesity paradox studies weren't lean because they were naturally slim and healthy. They were lean because the cancer was actively starving them. They were already dying. They just happened to weigh less on the day the study started. When the Paris team adjusted their data to account for this, separating out patients who had lost more than 11% of their body weight before treatment, the obesity paradox vanished entirely. The apparent protective effect of being heavy was gone. It was never really there. What the data actually showed, once they measured things properly using CT scans, was that the patients who survived longest had high muscle mass regardless of their BMI, not body weight, not fat, muscle. This introduces a critically dangerous condition called sarcopenic obesity. High fat, very low muscle, simultaneously. These patients might have a normal or elevated BMI and look perfectly fine on paper. But internally, their biological reserves are empty. They have no armor, and the standard scale is completely blind to it. If the standard scale lies about who will survive treatment, what happens when we use that same scale to calculate the actual dose of toxic chemotherapy we pump into someone's veins? When oncologists calculate chemotherapy doses, they don't use muscle mass. They use a formula called body surface area, an estimate of your total skin surface, calculated from height and weight alone. It's the same ruler measuring the same spine. The assumption, made decades ago, was that body surface area correlates with how fast the liver and kidneys can process drugs. But just like BMI, it tells you nothing about what the body is actually made of. 200 pounds of muscle and 200 pounds of fat get the exact same chemotherapy dose. And a 2025 paper from Belgium shows why that is so dangerous, focusing on paclitaxel, one of the most widely used chemotherapy drugs in breast cancer treatment. Paclitaxel is lipophilic. It loves fat. When it enters the body, it has a strong chemical affinity for adipose tissue. Think of the patient's fat as a giant sponge and their muscle as an engine that processes and clears the drug. Now apply that to a patient with sarcopenic obesity, high fat, low muscle. They have a massive sponge and a tiny struggling engine. The drug enters the bloodstream and the sponge immediately soaks it up, pulling it into fat deposits. The tiny engine is overwhelmed and can't clear it efficiently. Instead of a quick targeted strike against the tumor, the drug becomes a slow-release poison capsule, seeping back into the blood over days and weeks. It lingers far longer than intended. The consequences are devastating. These patients suffer profound nerve damage, numbness, burning pain, tingling in the hands and feet that can last for years after the cancer is gone. Their white blood cell counts collapse, leaving them vulnerable to life-threatening infections. And because the side effects become so severe, doctors are often forced to lower the dose or stop treatment entirely. The chart will show the dose was correct. It followed the standard formula to the letter. But the formula didn't know about the sponge and the engine. The patient's body was being poisoned by a calculation that was technically perfect and biologically wrong. Here is where this story stops being a cautionary tale and becomes something genuinely empowering. Patients are not passive recipients of whatever biological circumstances they arrive with. Body composition is modifiable, and the same 2025 Belgian paper introduces exercise in a completely new light, not as a lifestyle recommendation or a way to stay positive during treatment, but as a literal chemical modifier of the drug. When you do resistance training combined with aerobic exercise, you are actively remodeling your biology. You are building the engine and shrinking the sponge. More muscle means the drug distributes more efficiently, reaches tumor sites at better concentrations, and is cleared from the body faster. Less fat means less sequestration, less slow-release toxicity, less lingering damage. Exercise also reduces chronic inflammation. And here's why that matters for chemotherapy. The same inflammation produced by excess fat that exhausts the immune system also blocks the liver enzymes responsible for breaking down drugs like paclitaxel. Regular exercise puts out that fire, clears the roadblock, and lets the liver do its job. You are changing the pharmacy inside your own body just by moving it. This is the frontier of current research. A clinical trial called PABTOX launched in Belgium in 2024. The first to directly measure in real time how structured exercise during chemotherapy changes the behavior of paclitaxel in human breast cancer patients. It represents the beginning of a shift from one-size-fits-all dosing toward treatment that accounts for the actual biology of the person receiving it. And the tools to go further are already sitting in hospitals right now. CT scans, which most cancer patients are already receiving as part of standard diagnosis and monitoring, contain detailed information about muscle and fat distribution. AI software can extract this information automatically in seconds with no extra burden on the patient. We could abandon the bathroom scale as a clinical tool tomorrow. The data is already there. The clinic just needs to catch up to the science. Body fat is not just a number on a scale. It is an active, highly influential participant in your healthcare. We started with a paradox, the idea that excess fat was somehow saving people from cancer, and we unraveled that illusion to find the real story underneath. What actually determines whether you survive cancer treatment is not what you weigh. It is how much functioning muscle you have, whether you are actively losing weight without trying, and the biological quality of the tissue your body is made of. The consequences of getting this wrong are not just statistical anomalies in a medical journal. They show up in whether a drug reaches its target. They show up in whether a patient suffers irreversible nerve damage. They show up in whether treatment gets stopped before it has a chance to work, and ultimately in whether people get to go home. We have to stop treating patients as two-dimensional equations based on height and weight. The biology is more interesting than that, more complex, and when we measure it properly, far more informative.